Now that we've created most of the detail in the center of our steering wheel, let's take a closer look at creating the actual steering wheel portion. Let's start by turning on our sketch picture and taking a look at what we have to create. When we talked about our plan of attack, we made note that it might be easier to create portions such as this upper section and the lower section before having to deal with all the complex geometry in the hand grip section. So let's start by creating the upper section of our steering wheel and the tachometer. I'm going to start by creating a sketch on the front face of our steering wheel. I want to create a center line path for the steering wheel. So I'm going to start by creating two construction lines. One that's going to go up from the origin to roughly the center of my steering wheel up top. One from the origin down to an area a little bit past where the carbon fiber section ends. And the reason I do this is because I'm going to trim the surface back to make sure I have a clean edge and I'm not trying to transition the surface into a section here. Next, let's start by adding some dimensions. In this case, let's add a 200 millimeter dimension. We'll add a 195 down here. Looks to be about right. Let's apply an angle dimension here as well. We'll do 70 degrees. Now what we'd like to create is our center line path between the two. Because this isn't a simple arc or a simple circle, we want to create a spline that represents the geometry. I'm going to create two more construction lines, one that's horizontal at the top edge, again to make sure that we keep any kind of relation when we mirror this part to the left-hand side from creating any dips or bumps in our steering wheel. Then I'm going to create a perpendicular line by applying a relation. Now I can create a spline using a start and an end point, apply a tangent relation, and use my handles to try to create geometry that replicates the steering wheel. Now you can notice that the section actually drops down fairly quickly up top and is not staying within the center line of our intended path. So what this means is we're probably going to have to add a secondary point by right-clicking on our spline and saying Insert Spline Point. We have to be extremely careful that we're not inducing any bad geometry into our spline, so we're going to drag it roughly into place, select the spline, and show curvature. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I want to show you that where we inserted that spline point, we actually have a drastic change in curvature, but the important thing to note is that the curvature change is smooth. If we had any jagged changes, we'd be inducing a very big problem into our final surface. We're going to need to move this just a little bit more. Notice that I'm using the spline point we inserted rather than the handle at this point. Zoom back out, take a look at our curvature, and I think we're going to move forward with this. I'm going to hit OK, and I'm leaving this line underdefined because it's possible we'll have to come back later and do some more tweaks to get the final shape right. The next thing I want to do is create a new plane that's based on the spline we created and its endpoint. This is going to create a plane where we can draw a circle that's going to be used as the endpoint for our loft. At the top section, we can use the right plane. So let's start a new sketch on our right plane and draw a circle. Give the circle a 35 millimeter dimension. Grab its center point and Control select the spline and make sure that you apply the pierce relation. This will make sure that the center line pierces the spline where they intersect on our right plane. If we look at this from the front, the 35 millimeter is pretty close to the size of our steering wheel. Next, we want to make a sketch on the new plane that we created. And again, we're going to draw a circle. This one's actually going to be a little bit larger. Let's start with a 45 millimeter and see how that works. Next, again, we want to select the center point, Control select our spline, and make sure that those pierce. If we look at this from the front, we can see that it's fairly close to the right size. We can OK that, hide our sketch plane, and create a loft between the two. So for my profiles, I want to select the 35 millimeter circle and the 45 millimeter circle. Instead of using a guide curve, I'm going to use a center line. The center line is going to be the spline we created. I want to make sure that the geometry matches our sketch as close as possible. And you can see we have fairly good transition here and everything is nice and smooth. I'm going to go back up to my start and end profiles. Make sure that my start constraint is normal to profile. Without this normal to profile, we could accidentally induce a dip or a bump where we're going to mirror this across the right plane. Let's hit OK and take a look at our result. So you can see that it falls a little short for the curvature on our steering wheel. Especially on the inside edge, we can really notice where the difference is. So to fix this, let's expand on the loft we created and modify sketch 40. We're going to edit this sketch. We're going to try to drag this geometry up a little bit more. I'm going to activate this handle on the bottom right hand side, grab this line point we inserted, move it around to get it a little bit closer, and actually give this a little bit larger diameter. Let's say 203 millimeters. Take a look at our curvature, make sure that we haven't induced anything that's going to create problems in our surface. Exit the sketch and take a closer look at what we've done. You can see we're still falling a little bit short here, so we're going to have to modify our geometry even farther. We're going to go to 205 millimeters, and we really need to focus on dragging this line point out to make sure it stays in this center. Next thing we're going to do is change the angle of our lower handle. Once you get it approximately right, make sure that you haven't induced any dips into your curvature combs. You can go back and you can apply dimensions. For instance, we can grab the angle and apply an 89-degree angle here. We can apply a weight to this handle, 105 millimeters. We can apply a location to this point. We can apply a weight to this handle, and anything you need to do to make sure that this spline is fixed in your sketch. So once we exit, everything looks pretty good here. That concludes creating the base shape for our upper steering wheel.